Hello, very beautiful community. This interview is a quagmire, ethically and politically, so we'll try to negotiate it, because negotiating it isn't just voyeuristic. It's not just about giving scores out of 10 to the two people involved in the exchange. It's actually about understanding how responsible institutions should deal with irresponsible political actors if they're actors of cultural significance in our culture. And thinking about that well is paradoxical, problematic, but good for you as citizens if you are citizens who want to keep your democracy in the 2030s. So I'm going to press screen record, beautiful community, and we are going to go.
I'm about to ask you that question. Clearly, I think you and I agree. We have both been critical of the Israeli.
So this is Tucker Carlson being interviewed for the Economist by the editor-in-chief of the Economist, Zani Minton-Beddoes.
Government. I just want to kind of clarify terms a bit here.
Well, I've really been critical of the Israeli government.
I've been plenty critical of the Israeli government. I've told you at the beginning that we were against this war.
What do you think of Gaza?
What do I think of Gaza?
Yeah.
I think
well, before we land on that bombshell, let's immediately clarify something really important about what we're seeing. There's an instinct in you that might go like this. I just can't stand this guy. I can't stand seeing him on my screen. I don't want him to be interviewed by anybody. I don't want to see him out there. Is that okay? Yes. If it's an expression of your authentic disposition, if it's not just something you imposed on yourself to position yourself politically on social media. But it doesn't follow from that you develop a propositional claim that it is the wrong thing to do to interview Tucker Carlson if you're a major journalistic institution. But why isn't it the wrong thing to do? Why isn't it the wrong thing to do? It's not the wrong thing to do because it's only wrong if you have a very perverse, excessive liberal conception of political conflict as modeled on rational intellectual disagreement. And that is a conception that has come to prevail, unfortunately, in middle-class living rooms in the last 20 or 30 years. And it's a conception that makes citizens like you bad at engaging in conflict constructively with irresponsible political actors in your culture. And when that happens, your risk of losing your democracy increases. So the citizen who wants to engage in conflict constructively is not going to say, I genuinely believe that The Economist should not be interviewing Bannon or Tucker Carlson. But there's a huge but coming. And it's a but that we don't understand. I was going to say sufficiently. I'm afraid to say at the level of how major institutions practice, we don't understand it at all. And that's that you can't conceive of Tucker Carlson as a holder of views when you're interviewing him. You have to conceive of him at least as much as an operator in the informational market. And that means the question you come at him with changes from, Tucker, what do you think about XYZ, to Tucker, what are you doing? What are you doing with the algorithmic incentives that are putting pressure on you? What are you doing with the financial incentives that are putting pressure on you? What is the one false thing that your audience thinks because it is your audience? When was the last time you told them something they didn't want to hear? These are not the questions I recommend Zani ask. They are questions, however, that train you into this procedural interview mindset, whereby you're not asking for views, you're also asking for that person to talk about in a way that exposes them, in a way that might make them hang themselves, about how they operate in the informational environment. And you've got to do research on that as much as you've got to do research on whatever Tucker has said about Mongolia, Tasmania, or the price of coffee, right? You've got to research how he operates, what pressures is he under, how is he responding to them, right? You've got to look at what kind of post-truth communication he's been engaging with. Why has he been saying 7 different things about the same issue over the course of a couple of years? Why has he approached certain topics with a staggering level of obfuscation? Find examples, present them to him. Tucker, this is what you said. What were you doing when you said that? What's that all about, right? And you've got to do the research here. You've got to discover the facts, right? So to take this on an absolutely infinitesimal scale. Since the Iran war began, because I've criticized Israel in the course of this Trumpian misadventure, about 10-15%, about 15% of my Patreon dropped. Now, it's completely reasonable that questions get asked about whether, if that continues, would I continue saying critical things about any state out there if it has that consequence for me? The answer is yes. But you're going to take for granted that it's yes with me. But it's not clear that you can take it for granted with every content maker you encounter, right? I'm going to do a very long chat about Israel-Gaza in a couple of days, hopefully, after I release the next main channel video. That's going to create another 15% drop in my Patreon, probably, and it's gonna trigger some physical threats against me as well, because I'll be criticizing Israel very strongly. That is multiplied by, these pressures are multiplied by 1,000 when it comes to Tucker Carlson. Do the research, right? And then it's not that difficult to put him under pressure, because he is constantly saying evasive, convoluted, and absurd post-truth things, right? So it's a completely different mindset. You can't do interviews like this, like it's 1998. What do you think of this? Let's debate this, or let's clarify your position. No. Challenge these people procedurally, especially when you're interviewing post-truth sort of commentariat entrepreneurs. Okay.
War in Gaza, to start with, was a perfectly reasonable response in response to the horrors of October 7th. I think now the places, I mean, I've been there. Have you been to Gaza? I've been to Gaza since the war started.
They would not
it's
let
catastrophic.
me into Gaza. Trust me, very few journalists get into Gaza.
Yeah, no, I went with the IDF. It's the only way that you can go in, but nonetheless you go in and you see a flattened place. I think it is a disaster for the future of Israel, a disaster for the Palestinian people, a horror, 70,000 people dead.
Why would you describe it first as a disaster for the future of Israel? You've got tens of thousands of civilians murdered, but it's foremost a disaster for the future of Israel? No, it's foremost a disaster for the families of the dead kids.
Absolutely. I made 3 points.
Because everybody sucks up to Israel in this way that suggests they're afraid.
Well, let's get on to that right now.
Yeah.
Because you...
Okay. So this is one of the 2 key issues that arises in the interview. What do you think about Gaza? The second one is Zani asking Tucker, do you think the Israeli state has a right to exist? So let's start with what Tucker does there. And I'm going to be more favorable to Zani on the second issue and less favorable to her on the first. This immediately puts us into an ethical dilemma. Here we have a responsible journalist being challenged by an inherently irresponsible actor in a way that is broadly correct. What the hell do we do about that? Do we say, because it's Tucker Carlson, we can't give him credit for making the right point? Or do we say, well, we just have to count the chips with everybody? And the same goes for political actors. If somebody does something good, let's count it, even if 98% of the things they do are bad. That's a mistake with commentators who operate in the informational environment in the entrepreneurial way in which Tucker does. Because even when he's saying something that's true, his relationship with that true thing, for my taste, is too instrumental to say Tucker is a dodgy actor, but he's got that one right. No, to get that one right, there has to be a sufficient absence of instrumentality in your relationship with that thing you've got right. Tucker lacks it. So no, I'm not impressed with people thirsty for mainstream institutions to be challenged like this, retweeting endlessly, I don't like Tucker, but go Tucker in this particular case. No, I don't recommend giving any credit to Tucker for this, because if he is excessively instrumental when he does post-truth, or gets things wrong, he is also excessively instrumental when he gets things right. But what you can do is criticize Zanny here. Now you can say maybe she just misspoke. And I'm inclined to that interpretation often, because I speak in public, especially, in my case, I speak in public with brain inflammation. So I'm constantly having convoluted sentences come out of my mouth, excessively big words. I say things in the wrong order. So I get it. But I felt that there was evidence of a clear ethical weighing there. It wasn't just a case of misspeaking, right? The barbarism of October 7th is a kind of outbreak of primitivism and modernity and, modern primitive impulse and primitive modern impulse. It's this sort of, contemporary barbarism, technological barbarism. And it's very bad, and it's terrible, and it's barbaric, and it's a crime. Okay, great. Now, that was followed by an Israeli war that became a war on civilians, with tens of thousands dying unjustifiedly. And what is that? A setback for Israel. No, I'm sorry. There is no equivalence between Israel, Gaza, and Russia and Ukraine, right? Israel is neither Russia nor Gaza, and Gaza is neither Russia nor Ukraine. But still, even though it's a stretch, it's not completely impertinent to say that what Russia's done in Mariupol is certainly a setback for Russia's future. That's true too. But that's not the first thing we'd ideally want to say. But this puts us into that paradoxical situation again, where it's an irresponsible actor making a powerfully resonant good point. And here we have to hold the discipline and apply the criticism to Zanny, but without giving the credit to Tucker. Okay, let's move on.
Are critical of the government of Israel. Do you believe in Israel's right to exist? Would you consider yourself a Zionist in that narrow definition?
What does that mean, a right to exist?
The existence of the political state of Israel as
but
it
has
existed,
a right. What does that mean?
That you think it should continue in its existence as a state right now. So you do not agree with Iran, for example.
Well, let me just ask, since you asked me the question, it's fair for me to get you to define the term so I can answer it. You've asked two questions. The first was, do you believe Israel has a right to exist? And the second question was, do you believe Israel should continue to go on as a nation state? And those are very different questions. So I often hear the phrase...
Having been created as a political entity in 1948,
does it have a right to exist? Is that what you're asking?
I don't want to get hung up on the right to
no.
Should it continue to exist? That's how I define narrowly Zionism.
Because the phrase you used was devised by the Israeli government. Of course, it
wasn't devised by the Israeli government. It was around in the 40s. It was around before the formation of Israel in direct form. But certainly, it has been a typical tool in the toolkit of people who want to decenter their interview guests. And you'd often hear, before we say anything, let me just get your position on whether Israel has a right to exist. So that can become a little bit of political technology. But there is an important but here, because there's an outbreak right now on social media of people claiming that there is something about political philosophy or international norms or political thought that means that it makes no sense for us to speak about states having or lacking a right to exist. Individuals have a right to self-determination, but that's about it. And so the implication is that this notion of a state having or lacking a right to exist has only come up in this case because it's a tool of manipulation. And as a professional political philosopher, one who is off duty for health reasons, I can say there is certainly nothing in political thought that makes that question incoherent. Right? We don't talk about it in the case of France because it wouldn't make sense. But if Germans suddenly began speaking about how it would be good to have a Europe without France, would absolutely start talking about affirmations of France's right to exist. So there's no problem there. The problem is rather that I wouldn't love being asked that question, not because it's incoherent, or because we have to get too caught up on the concept of right. And I'm not going to do that now. As a political philosopher, we'd be here for 7 hours, because we would need to clarify what rights are, what human rights are, and that it would be here for too long. But the problem is that question breaks down into any range of sub-questions. And you'd probably need to answer those to give a coherent answer to the general question about whether there's a right to exist. And so that's the problem with it, right? So what are these questions, very briefly? I think one question would be Jewish statism, independent of that particular territory before the 1940s. Is Jewish statism legitimate? Simply the idea that the Jews need a state of their own, right? Yes or no? I'm going to say yes, but I'm not going to legislate on that. Next question. And here, potentially, you could say we cross into the most minimal conception of Zionism. And that is, did the Jews need a state of their own, and did they need a state of their own in that part of the world? Right? Is that a legitimate project? Right? Yes or no? Right. Next. Let's say you've said yes to both of the first two. Even if the answer is yes to the first two, has the yes to the second question sustained itself as a yes from 1948 to 2026? Yeah. Yes or no? Next. Does Israel have a right to exist as a Jewish state? With that qualification being taken prosaically and minimally? Yeah. Yes or no? Does Israel have a right to exist, and I'm probably in question 5 now, as a Jewish state, with the idea of a Jewish state being taken the way it is typically taken, which is a very rich ideological project? And that, as Israel's greatest philosopher Avishai Margalit says, would be irrational for any Palestinian to accept. We've already got 5 questions. That's the problem. You're not necessarily comfortable saying straight yes or no to the questions Zani's asking, because there are these sub-questions. But that's not because the initial question is incoherent or has no place. What would I do if I'm interviewing Tucker and I want to ask that question? I would simply say, do you unconditionally oppose eliminativist political projects? Projects that want to take action that brings closer a world in which there is no Israel. Do you unconditionally oppose those? That could be a version of that question that would corner Tucker into an answer, the way saying, does it have a right to exist? And, well, it's been since 48, it's been there, and it's still there. I mean, are you in favor of it? That could be a clearer way to do it.
Have a right to exist. And so my question to you would be, what does that mean?
Why don't you answer my question? It's a very simple question.
I don't know what your question is. Are you asking, does it have a right to exist, or do I want it to exist? Do I seek its
So if you're a responsible actor, if Zani is asking that of me, I say, look, I do find the question a little bit simplistic, because it requires answering several questions. But roughly speaking, I can tell you the way in which I think Israel has a right to exist, and this is that particular way. I don't need to do as big a song and dance about it as Tucker is doing. So I don't trust the song and dance he is doing. It's not compelling to me. It's not authentic to me. It's too performative. I do think that the question has been politically misused, but it is a coherent question, and it's transparent that Zanny is not being manipulative or post-truth in the way she's putting the question. She genuinely wants to pin him down with an answer. And if that's the case, you say, well, look, I'm struggling a bit with your question. It's not as simple as I think it might sound, but here is an answer to a version of the question that I want to answer, or here is an answer in full to the question with a couple of qualifications. You do that. You don't do a 4 or 5 minute, a performance about what a ridiculous question it is and how Zanny can't define it.
Fine, answer it that way.
Well, of course I don't seek its destruction. I've already said, as you know, because I said it to you, I don't want Israel to be destroyed or have to use nuclear weapons.
We've established that you are in that narrow terms a Zionist. If that's how
I'm in no sense a Zionist. I don't want any country to be destroyed at all, and I don't want people to die, particularly ones who committed no crime, because I don't believe in killing innocents, period. That's the basis of Western civilization. Eastern civilization is a whole different view. They believe in to punishment. I don't.
So you're in no sense a Zionist?
I don't even know what that means. Why don't you define the term, and then I'll tell you whether I am.
I've just defined it.
What's
you said that a Zionist, in my narrow term, this definition is that the state of Israel, the political state of Israel, has the right to continue existing.
The right? Where does that right come from? What do you mean? These are I'm not being a lawyer about it. I just want to know what you're asking me.
Refusing to answer the question.
Because I don't know what you're asking me.
Let's go to the third.
Wait, no. I think a lot. You don't want to define your question, and I don't know why. I don't know what you're asking me. I've already said I don't want Israel to be destroyed. I don't want anyone to be killed. And you've said, does Israel have a right to exist? Does it have my question is, what right are you talking about? Does Britain have a right to exist? Does the United States have a right to exist?
There was a world order built up after 1945 which suggested that aggression should not be condoned into countries.
Okay, we've got it. I don't trust that dance that Tucker did, I'm sorry to say. Even though I do think a twofold response is possible. This question is often a tool of political manipulation, number one. And two, it is a coherent enough question, so here is how I'm going to personally answer it, right? I'm going to say that Israel has the right to exist, but not as a Jewish state in that rich ideological conception. Whatever. You can take a position on it, you can give that, having first pointed out that it's a politically manipulative question, especially as Zanny was not trying to catch him out, the way, I don't know, Piers Morgan might. I think that dance is inauthentic. I think it's performative, and I also think it's quite genius. I do think Tucker Carlson is an extraordinarily successful manipulator in the information environment, and I think that my answer that I've recommended, the more responsible answer, is much less successful in the informational environment than Tucker's answer. I think that kind of, I'm genuinely befuddled, and I'm still befuddled after Zanny has tried several clarifications. I think that answer is much more effective. So there we go. We're going to be increasingly dealing with this question of what is that threshold of responsibility or irresponsibility where you have to cross, not interviewing people, but into interviewing them procedurally, so that you focus on what are you doing in the information environment as opposed to what do you think about A, B, C, D, E, F, G. As you know, these sort of micro-informational sessions for us are, a process, and we'll keep going with it. And it's important to keep us awake as citizens. Bye for now, beautiful community.